The heat is still being put on the Trump administration. Huge protests in D.C. on Thursday. Again, this is the heat over the immigration policy and the separation of immigrant families. Even though, you know, the executive order was signed and there are efforts being made to reunite the families, but that may not be going, from a lot of reports, is not going smoothly.
Right.
So during this protest Thursday, there were several people, actually several hundred people arrested. Among them, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from Washington State. And she was arrested. Susan Sarandon was arrested. Like we said, many people refused to move when police moved in, and they were arrested. So joining us right now is Congresswoman Jayapal. Thank you so much for being with us, Congresswoman.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it's so interesting. You know, I'm old enough, Congresswoman, to remember, obviously, the protests in the Vietnam War. It's starting to feel that way to me, that same kind of vibe.
I totally agree with you. You know, when I showed up yesterday, there were about 2,500 women total from all over that had come in, and there were 650 who got arrested. And it was beautiful, actually. It was intense. I'm a big believer in using the tactics of civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience, and that's what it was. It was women, mothers, actresses. Eve Ensler was with us as well, a dear friend of mine. And, you know, people saying this is outrageous. This is a government policy that Trump instituted to put kids in cages, to separate children from their families, breastfeeding children taken off the breasts of moms, to put asylum seekers in prison. This can't be who we are, and we have to stand up and speak out. But I don't think that Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents can forget that this is us. We are taking children, putting them in cages. Today, we're hearing reports about 3-year-olds in court by themselves. I mean, what are we doing? And I think this is far beyond politics. This is about right and wrong. And that's why tomorrow, you know, we have over 400,000 people signed up to be in rallies in every one of the 50 states across the country to keep this front and center and to say to the president, just as, you know, protesters did during the Vietnam War with Nixon, to say to the president, you can end this today. We don't need executive orders. We don't need legislation. You just need to pick up the phone or get on your Twitter account and send a tweet over to Attorney General Jeff Sessions and tell Secretary Nielsen and Sessions to end this policy, and then let's reunite these kids and let's give asylum seekers a real way to seek asylum.
Congresswoman, I think one of the things that you can really offer to this movement is that you are part of a small group of people who have actually been to these camps, and I understand that you had a pretty harrowing experience when you ran into, when you were talking to one woman who was being detained.
Yes, I went almost 3 weeks ago now, 3 weeks tomorrow, to the federal prison where 174 women had been transferred from the Texas border to the prison. I spoke to them, and the stories were just awful, haunting. I have not been able to sleep since hearing these stories. One woman who said she had 3 children. Her first child was shot and murdered by gangs. Her second child shot and paralyzed by gangs. And finally, she had to make the tragic decision to leave that second child because she didn't think he could make the journey, and to bring her final 3rd child to try to get safety for this child. Another woman who actually had a blind child, had to leave that child again in order to bring another child. And they told stories of how their children had been taken from them without them having a chance to say goodbye, and then sitting in a room where they could hear in the next room their children screaming for them, children as young as 1-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah. Hey, and now the challenge of reuniting those families is going to be very difficult.
We're about out of time. I want to ask you something. You know, it seems like this is the breaking point, that no matter how you feel about guns and how you feel about abortion and everything else, when you see kids ripped away from their families this way, and as you said, put in cages, it would seem that this is the thing that would be the breaking point, and that some Republicans in Congress would break and have like safe cover because they could say, I'm doing this because of what he's doing with kids. Yet we haven't seen that yet, and it just seems like if it were to happen, it would have been this issue. But it doesn't feel like it's been a tipping point yet.
Well, I think we're getting there. I mean, I think the reason the president signed that sham executive order, which did nothing to reunite these kids with their families and actually made things worse, allowed for indefinite family prison camps, the reason that happened is because he was starting to feel the pressure. And even though Republicans in Congress weren't speaking out, I'm telling you, Republicans across the country are speaking out. And I think that Trump is badly miscalculating this. He wants to believe that immigration is always going to be a dividing issue that works for him. But the reality is, as I said before, this isn't about politics anymore. This is about right or wrong. And I hope that my Republican colleagues in Congress start speaking out. I know that they don't feel good about this. They've told me that behind the scenes, but they're terrified of losing their positions because they fear Donald Trump as a bully in the bully pulpit, and they don't want to say anything. But there are some things that are not ever worth being silent for. And I think kids in cages is one of those things.
Yep. All right. Well, Congresswoman, thanks so much for being with us. Of course, as you said, on Saturday, the FamiliesBelongTogether.org protests going on across the country. We wish you the best.
It's
Thanks
really
so
a pleasure having you on TMZ Live, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to come back. Thanks for everything you do.